The Sabbath controversies are an important part of the gospel story. Whilst Jesus is otherwise law-abiding, there are certain moments which draw his behaviour into question. We have already seen questions raised about his dining with sinners, but Jesus' attitude towards the Sabbath and his actions in the temple are the clearest legal grounds for hostility amongst the growing number of Jesus' opponents. On the other hand, we have no accusations regarding circumcision or dietary laws, the other features of Judaism which were particularly important by Jesus' time. These two Sabbath stories are placed carefully after a banquet scene at the end of chapter 5. There are also points of controversy. The first regards Jesus' fellowship with sinners, and the second is about Jesus' lack of fasting. Curiosity turns to concern, and then to fury and plotting by the end of the second Sabbath episode. But the end of chapter 5 helps us understand what is happening in chapter 6. Jesus has defended his actions by pointing out the special time that his presence implies. Now that Jesus is here, albeit temporarily, things are different. This is what is happening with the plucking and eating of grain. Some of the Pharisees accuse him and his disciples of unlawful activity. They are referring to current interpretations of what it means to gather and prepare food, as the disciples are plucking and rubbing the grain. Jesus does not debate this point, but instead directs their attention to the actions of David. It seems acceptable that David could feed his hungry men with the showbread reserved only for the priests. If that is acceptable, then surely eating some grain in a field is also acceptable. But does Jesus also mean something else? If it is acceptable for David to do a thing, then how much more the Son of David? If Jesus does have this in mind, it is not made explicit. Instead, he makes the declaration that the Son of Man is Lord over the Sabbath. This again affirms a special dispensation which Jesus brings. But there is another point which the second episode brings out more clearly. The law was not simply made for the keeping of it. It was made for their benefit. If then there comes a choice between strict observance and the rescue of something or someone, the law should not be an excuse for doing nothing. Chapter 6 also has Luke's version of Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. Luke has a slightly different setting, which is on a level place as Jesus is coming down the mountain. This is why it is known as the Sermon on the Plain. Like Matthew's version, Jesus begins with Beatitudes, but there are quite a few differences. Matthew has 9, but Luke has 4. Matthew's are in the third person plural, blessed are they, and Luke's is in the second person plural, blessed are you. And perhaps the biggest difference is that Luke has 4 corresponding woes. The first beatitude is, blessed are you who are poor. Matthew's is, blessed are the poor in spirit. It is often thought that Luke's version is focused on actual poverty, but Matthew's is more spiritual, that is, it is focused on attitude. This is bolstered by the second beatitude of Luke's, which is about being hungry now, whereas in Matthew it is those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Again, a more obviously spiritual angle. The corresponding woes against the rich and the full only seem to sharpen the emphasis on the material conditions, not spiritual, in Luke. And certainly Luke does have some teaching in his gospel unique to him, which has this theme. The story of Lazarus and the rich man is one, but there is also a parable about the foolish rich man too, who builds his barns for his comfortable future, only to die that same night. And in Acts, the early days of the church were characterized by sharing and making sure no one was in need. But is Luke's version entirely material? It seems impossible that he would want to exclude the spiritual dimension of this teaching. To focus too much on the material is to miss the key word, now. The underlying message of these beatitudes and woes is to recognize the times you live in and reevaluate what is really of worth when the kingdom is arriving and judgment will come. A life spent gaining riches and filling one's belly is all the reward you will get. Worse is potentially to follow, as the woe might imply. Being poor, of course, leaves you more open to what God might do to help you. It is a situation of humiliation and vulnerability and dependence. But at the same time, Proverbs also says this: "Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that I need, or I shall be full and deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or I shall be poor and steal and profane the name of my God." The Bible knows the complicated and subtle ways of the human heart. Poverty does not automatically confer on you a certain spiritual condition. The human heart is still filled with pride and deceit and requires washing by the Spirit of God. The rest of the sermon contains material paralleled in Matthew 5 and 7, but other teaching, including the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, is absent here. Instead, Luke has distributed them across the chapters to come.